working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles. You're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. North Korea's attempt to launch a satellite didn't go as planned, according to North Korean state media. The launch ended in failure with the rocket and payload plunging into the sea. The World Meteorological Organization is saying that we really need to pay attention to the devastating effects of global warming on sea ice, icebergs, and glaciers. The UN Weather Agency announced it was making the Cryosphere a new top priority, saying the melting of ice, sea ice, glaciers, and permafrost pose a global threat. The Department of Agriculture plans to resolve around half of its 2,400 aging agrarian law implementation or ALI cases this year, according to DAR Secretary Conrado Estrella III. And the Philippines is exploring alternative labor markets as it seeks to resolve an impasse with Kuwait over entry and labor issues, according to the Department of Foreign Affairs. First in our news, North Korea's attempt to launch a satellite didn't go as planned. According to North Korean state media, the launch ended in failure, with the rocket and payload plunging into the sea. Following the launch, officials from the U.S., Japan, and South Korea held a phone call where they expressed strong condemnation of the event, according to Japan's foreign ministry. Take a look.
衛星と称したとしても、この弾道ミサイル技術を用いた発射、これは安保理決議違反であり、国民の安全に関わる重大な問題であると認識をしています。我が国領域内への落下に備えて、本日、防衛大臣から破壊措置命令、これを発出いたしました。
The South Korean military managed to recover parts of the launch vehicle. The failure of the Lima-1 satellite launch rocket was attributed to instability in the engine and fuel system, as reported by the state news agency KCNA. The South Korean military is currently conducting a salvage operation to recover the debris believed to be parts of the space launch vehicles. Pictures of the retrieved debris have been shared. During the incident, air raid sirens went off in Seoul, the capital of South Korea, causing some panic. However, it turned out to be a false alarm and the situation quickly calmed down. South Korean stocks and the won currency also remain stable.
네, 자다 문자를 받았는데 설마 전쟁이 나겠어 생각하고 다시 잤습니다.
솔직히 타당하다고 생각하진 않아요. 어찌됐든 뭐 나라로서 서로 인정을 하고 유엔도 가입돼 있고 이렇기 때문에 그것이 뭐 위성이든 아니면 뭐 자위권에 대한 내용이든 그거에 대한 좀 세밀한 서로 진정성 있게 바라보는 것이 더 중요하다고 생각을 했어요. 그런 뭐 이번에도 사실 우크라이나가 핵을 갖고 있었거나 아니면 거기에 상응하는 무기를 갖고 있었다면 침략당하지 않았을 것이고 우리나라도 마찬가지고 북한도 마찬가지고 그러한 선진국에 대한 일방적인 그런 블록화되는 거에 의한 자위권적인 수단으로 저는 생각이 들어요. 그리고
그런데 지금 북한이 미사일을 쏠 때가 아니라 북한에 있는 자국민들 생각을 해야 된다고 생각을 합니다. 자국민들은 지금 굶어 죽어가고 있고 탈출하고 있고 그리고 해외에 나가서 또 진짜 불쌍하게 뭐 나쁜 일을 당하거나 그러고 있는데 지금
In Japan, meanwhile, the government issued an emergency warning in the southern prefecture of Okinawa, urging residents to take cover indoors. However, they later clarified that the rocket wouldn't reach Japanese territory, leading to the lifting of the warnings. It's worth noting, though, that South Korea recently successfully placed satellites in orbit using their own rocket, while China sent astronauts to its space station for crew rotation. North Korea admitted to the technical failure, stating that the rocket lost thrust due to an abnormality in the second stage engine. The country's National Aerospace Development Administration plans to investigate the defects risks and take action to overcome them before attempting another launch as soon as possible. In tonight's other news, the World Meteorological Organization is saying that we really need to pay attention to the devastating effects of global warming on sea ice, icebergs, and glaciers. They're part of what scientists call the cryosphere. WMO is warning us that the melting of glaciers and ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica is responsible for about half of the rising sea levels. And unfortunately, this rise is happening faster and faster, causing disasters in small island nations and coastal areas where lots of people live. Take a look.
Professor Petri-Talas also remarked about was that the discussions and the concern that was being voiced was global. We had delegates speaking from small island states in the Caribbean. We had delegates speaking from Africa, obviously delegates from Canada, from the Russian Federation, Antarctic regions, all of them united in saying that, what happens in polar regions, in high mountain regions, doesn't stay in those regions, but it's affecting everybody. It's having a global impact, and in particular on small island states and densely populated coastal zones. And the quote from Professor Petri-Talas, WMO Secretary General, is the cryosphere issue is a hot topic, not just for the Arctic and the Antarctic. It's really a global issue. More than 1 billion people rely on water from snow and glacier melt, which is carried by the major rivers of the world. When those glaciers retreat, you need to think what's going to happen to the water security of those people.
And here's a shocking fact. The average thickness of glaciers worldwide has dropped by almost 30 meters since 1970. This is a clear indication of how serious the situation is. But that's not all. The WMO also talked about the melting Arctic permafrost, which they called a sleeping giant. Why? Because it's hiding a massive amount of greenhouse gases, around twice as much carbon as what's currently in the atmosphere.
Arctic permafrost, so that's literally permanently frozen soil. It's melting. It's referred to as a sleeping giant. One of the presentations yesterday talked about this being the sleeping giant of greenhouse gases. It stores twice as much carbon as in the atmosphere today, so we need to monitor what is happening in the permafrost. Glaciers, Greenland and Antarctic ice sheet melt accounts for about 50% of sea level rise, and that level is increasing. The rate of sea level rise is increasing. We're seeing more natural hazards in mountain areas, glacial flood outbursts, which is literally, just glaciers breaking off and crashing into dams and areas.
Now, to tackle this issue, the WMO has made it one of their top priorities. They're calling for better predictions, more research, sharing of data, and more investment. They want to get a handle on this problem before it gets even worse. The Philippines is exploring alternative labor markets as it seeks to resolve an impasse with Kuwait over entry and labor issues, according to the Department of Foreign Affairs. DFA Undersecretary Eduardo Jose de Vega expressed optimism that both parties would soon address their misunderstandings. De Vega emphasized the friendly relationship between the Philippines and Kuwait, stating that the government would not respond to the suspension of visa issuance for Filipinos with a deployment ban.
Kuwait is still our friend, no? Siguro sa July, we hope to have a future negotiation. Ang goal natin, eventually, si Secretary Ople mismo ang pumunta doon para kausapin yung kanyang mga counterparts doon, no? Ganun pa man, kahit na wala tayong delegation doon, tuloy ang pagkikipag-usap ng ating embahada sa Kuwait doon sa mga foreign ministry sa Kuwait. So, in fact, there are positive signals lately about it. No, na sabi naman ng Ministry of Interior, the door is still open for future negotiations. So ngayon tungkol sa future deployment, hindi naman natin binalak na mag-ban. Kailangan lang ma-improve yung conditions ng mga kasambahay. Kailangan pag-usapan natin with Kuwait paano nagkakaroon tayo ng sistema na tumutulong tayo sa inyo na hindi naman lumalabag sa regulations ng Kuwait. So, violation naman ng responsibility ng Philippine government kung walang gagawin yung ating pamahalaan. Kunyari, may humingi ng tulong dahil walang gagawin. Hindi tatawagan yung employer, hindi tatawagan yung agency. Eh di para pa sila nandun. Now, dapat nga, maaari, dapat through the Kuwaiti authorities. Pero minsan, kung quicker action is necessary, siguro naman dapat maintindihan ng Kuwait to kasi hindi naman nagre-reklamo yung mga ibang bansa sa Gulf tungkol sa shelters o sa ginagawa natin. No? Hindi naman, Kuwait lang.
Now, this statement coincided with an announcement from the Department of Migrant Workers that Saudi Arabia is also considering a special hiring program to recruit 1 million skilled workers from the Philippines within the next 2 years in response to its own labor requirements. Looking ahead, the Vega hopes that Kuwait and Manila can hold another bilateral meeting by July 2023 to continue discussions. However, Manila firmly maintained its position that it did not violate any regulations while seeking to safeguard its nationals in Kuwait. He clarified that the government will not issue an apology or file a case against Philippine embassy officials, which were among the main demands made by the Kuwaiti government when it first imposed the entry ban on Filipinos.
Position natin is wala tayong violations at kung meron man, kailangan pakinggan nila yung ating paliwanag na meron ding international law obligation or function yung mga embassies na protektahan yung kanilang mga nationals, no?
Currently, there are approximately 290,000 Filipinos residing and working in Kuwait, with a significant number employed as household service workers. In other news, the Department of Justice has made a request to the Regional Trial Court of Muntinlupa City to overturn its decision that acquitted former Senator Leila de Lima in a conspiracy case related to illegal drug trading at the New Bilibid prison in Muntinlupa City. The acquittal was based on reasonable doubt. In a 91-page motion for reconsideration, the panel of prosecutors led by Provincial Prosecutor Ramoncito Ocampo Jr. raised concerns about the motive behind the main witness, former officer in charge of the Bureau of Corrections, Rafael Ragos, recanting his testimony, which led to the dismissal of the drug case. The prosecution highlighted that Ragos' recantation occurred just 8 days before the 2022 presidential election, in which De Lima was running for re-election as a senator. Now, this timing raises doubts about the motive behind the sudden change in testimony, according to the motion for reconsideration. The Muntinlupa RTC Branch 204 presiding judge Abraham Joseph Alcantara had given weight to Ragos' recantation in acquitting De Lima and her bodyguard Ronnie Dayan in a ruling issued on May 13, 2013. The trial court stated that without Ragos' statement, there is reasonable doubt regarding the crucial link needed to establish the conspiracy. Ragos previously executed an affidavit on September 5, 2016, claiming that in November and December 2012, he and his aide delivered significant amounts of money to De Lima and Dayan, which allegedly came from the proceeds of drug operations by high-profile inmates at the NBP. However, Ragos recanted his statements in a May 2022 affidavit. The panel of prosecutors argues that Ragos' recantation should not be solely relied upon as the determining factor in rendering the judgment. They maintain that his original testimony given in open court remains valid, and there are other pieces of evidence on record that can prove De Lima's guilt. The Department of Agriculture plans to resolve around half of its 2,400 aging agrarian law implementation or ALI cases this year, according to DAR Secretary Conrado M. Estrella III. In a press conference, Estrella mentioned that he would be signing the resolution for 200 cases the following day, bringing the total number of resolved ALI cases to 1,200. One of the recently settled cases involved a dispute between two farmers groups over 600 hectares of land in Hacienda Tinang, Concepcion, Tarlac.
At siguro in a matter of 2 weeks magdi-distribute na kami ng land titles dito para wala hong gulo. And again, we will be able to forge peace and prosperity to our farmers.
Australia stated that land titles would be distributed to 450 families involved in the case within the next 2 weeks, aiming to prevent further conflicts. Apart from the ALI cases, the Department of Agrarian Reform Adjudication Board has an additional 2,300 pending cases. Australia attributed the large backlog to a shortage of personnel, specifically lawyers.
Ang problema namin kaya hindi kami makaharangkada ay kulang kami sa mga abogado. And we can only hire lawyers initially na ang sweldo is only 50,000. And it will be difficult for us to hire credible and capable lawyers with only 50,000 a month. So what we did in the Agrarian Reform is that yung mga positions that are unfilled, no, we embark on a crash. We abolished these positions, no, and we went into a we merged some of these positions. And then we created other positions with higher salaries.
Now, this initiative aligns with President Marcos's directive to implement genuine agrarian reform by resolving pending agrarian land cases and distributing 50,000 land titles within the year. In tonight's other news, the Cambodian King Norodom Sihamoni just arrived in New Delhi for a 3-day visit to India. He was warmly received by Raj Kumar Ranjan Singh, the Union Minister of State for External Affairs, at the airport. Meanwhile, the news was shared by Arindam Bagchi, the official spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs, on Twitter. He also mentioned that this visit is an opportunity to strengthen the historical ties between India and Cambodia. Now, this special visit by the Cambodian King marks the culmination of the 70th anniversary celebrations of diplomatic relations between the two countries. The Ministry of External Affairs highlighted that this is the first visit by a Cambodian king in almost 6 decades, with the last visit being made by the current king's father in 1963. The Cambodian king has planned bilateral meetings with President Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar, and External Affairs Ministers Jai Shankar will also have the opportunity to meet with the king. Additionally, as a gesture of respect, King Norodom Sihamoni will lay floral tributes at the memorial site of Mahatma Gandhi at Rajghat. The World Trade Organization took a step forward in resolving a disagreement between Indonesia and the European Union regarding tariffs imposed by the EU on stainless steel products. The WTO's dispute settlement body agreed to establish a panel to investigate the countervailing and anti-dumping measures imposed by Brussels on imports of stainless steel cold-rolled flat products from Indonesia. Indonesia believes that these measures violate international trade rules and filed a complaint in January. After unsuccessful consultations between the two parties, Indonesia requested the creation of an expert panel to settle the dispute. Although the EU initially blocked the first request, according to WTO rules, a second panel request is automatically accepted. The WTO's panel of independent trade and legal experts will now review the case, which typically takes several months before a decision is announced. If the panel rules in favor of Indonesia, retaliatory trade measures may be authorized. It's important to note also that the WTO's appeals tribunal, which used to handle challenges to panel decisions, has been inactive since 2019 due to the blocking of new judge appointments and demands for reform by the U.S. under former President Donald Trump. Apart from this ongoing dispute, the EU and Indonesia have several other trade disagreements, including EU restrictions on palm oil-based biofuels. As Indonesia is the world's largest producer, They're also at odds over a European law aiming to ban imports that contribute to deforestation. Despite these disputes, both the EU and Indonesia have expressed hopes of reaching a free trade agreement in 2023, as mentioned by the EU's ambassador to Jakarta earlier this year. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, advanced computing, and other emerging technologies are driving a revolutionary transformation across the globe. Countries like the US and China are leading the way in a fierce competition for industrial power, economic advantage, and strategic dominance through the development and utilization of these technologies. Now, to keep up with these rapid advancements and foster practical solutions for the world's biggest challenges, CSIS has launched the Wadhwani Center for AI and Advanced Technologies. To celebrate the launch, CSIS organized a half-day conference that delved into the current state of the field and the future implications of AI. Here are some excerpts.
To accelerate the adoption of data analytics and AI across the department, we like to do alliteration from the boardroom to the battlefield, and you see that in the portfolio, everything from the business side and how we manage our performance against the National Defense Strategy, implementation, business health metrics, and our strategic management plan, down to the JADC2 side with our relationship with the COCOMs and the services on how we use data at the edge.
How could a computer vision algorithm recognize what a Dow carrying drugs in the Arabian Gulf look like if it's never seen a Dow before? How could it identify what a one-way UAS looks like if it's never seen an Iranian one-way UAS? These are the types of live data and scenario-specific data that we can raise the flag on early and say, hey, this is going to matter a lot for the performance of what you're handing to us. And so again, if we transition to a more cyclical system of development where the user is much more aggressively involved, I think that we would be able to see capability faster and a little bit more effectively.
AI algorithms are learning and breathing, and they constantly change and adapt. You have to retrain them, you have to retrain your people on them, and you have to make sure that you've got the right information and data to feed them. And so that role between operator and developer, which has traditionally been divided, is much, much closer together, especially because you're going to use AI to solve a problem. You're going to fit it into your workflow.
Being precise about the problem and the application for technologies, whether it is AI and machine learning or otherwise, is critical, because otherwise you risk spending a lot of time and resources and brain power thinking about solutions that are generally interesting to everyone and specifically useful to no one.
Inside of CDAO, we're looking not just the unclassified version of SUNNet, but how can we take that classified? How can we have this capability that allows us to stand up an environment? Because in the future, we may not know which partners and allies need to interact. And that's exactly what happened in Ukraine. We're like, ooh, this is an interesting group of people. Like, we don't have a named network for this group of people, and we have to bring them all together.
Software-centric warfighting completely changes the way that we need to think about policy, and I think that we're in the middle. We are not towards the end, we are closer to the beginning, but we are lucky to have organizations like CDAO who are helping us navigate.
As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angela. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.